we start part 5 from the third Passover to the ensuing Feast of Tabernacles with the 26th chapter, so chapter 1, Unsettled, from April to October 29 of the Common Era, about 6 months. It does not appear that Jesus went up to Jerusalem to the Passover of this year, but it is supposed that his disciples did. There must have been multitudes at the great national celebration who had seen or heard of the feeding of the 5,000 and who knew the intense desire of the people to make Jesus king. Such things would be much talked of and most eagerly listened to. The intense interest excited by these reports probably hastened the determination of the hierarchic party to destroy Jesus. Jesus knew it, and ceased to travel in Judea proper, confining himself to Galilee. Soon after the Passover, a deputation from the Pharisees and scribes being charged to ascertain some ground of accusation against Jesus were dodging his steps and watching his movements, and spies of that character never fail to find in the most spotless life something to which they can take exception. Matthew 15 and Mark 7. That's what we're going to relate this to. Might want to turn to those. In addition to the scriptures, which contain the moral law in writing, the Pharisees endeavored to bind upon the consciousnesses of the people certain unwritten traditions of the elders, oral precepts, which they had attributed to the assistance of Moses. After the time of Jesus, these were collected into a book consisting of 2 parts: the Mishnah, the text of the supposed original precepts of the elders, and the Gemara, the comments of the text by the chief rabbis, the whole being called the Talmud. Well, the Talmud is collected, but I think there's an older history perhaps for some of that, but the oral Torah, as they call it, and groups have been divided whether to say, well, you can consider what was said, but it's not authoritative, because it's not prophetic. Others will say, okay, we'll accept both. Most say they accept both. And some say, well, we don't accept the Gemara, but we accept the Mishnah. Among the requirements of these traditions were many which obliged the Jews to wash often, and to wash more things, and to wash in peculiar ways. Mark has a note to that effect inserted parenthetically in his history. For the Pharisees and all the Jews, except they washed their hands often, eat not, holding their tradition of the elders. And on coming from the market, if they sprinkle not, they eat not. And many other things there are which they have received to hold as baptisms of cups, and of pots, and of vessels of brass. Well, if a pots or whatever's been used by disbelievers of one tradition, the substances that they consume, drugs and other things, you want to remove that from the vessels and clothing and stuff that you use yourself. On coming from any public assembly, it was in accordance with this ceremonial law that the whole body be washed, because it could not be known what defilement may have been contracted by contact with the common people. Now, see, the thing is not the common people. It's, we now know about diseases and stuff. But obviously some of this is would have been exaggerated. When this deputation of spies saw that Jesus and his disciples paid no regard to these requirements, they catechized him, saying, Why do your disciples not walk according to the tradition of the elders, but eat bread with unwashed hands? The plain intimation is that the master was held responsible for at least the known and unrebuked acts of his disciples. The stern reply of Jesus was, "Well, has Isaiah prophesied of you hypocrites?" When he said, representing Jehovah is speaking, you say Yahweh, no J or V sound in that language. "These people honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men. For you, leaving the commandment of God, hold the tradition of men. Well do you reject the commandment of God, that ye may keep your own tradition." So don't quite be a liberal and are conservative here, right? For Moses said, "Honor thy father and thy mother, and he who resisteth father or mother, let him end by death." Well, we all end by death, but you say that if a man shall say to his father or mother, korban, which means gift, it's qurban in the earlier Semitic root, and in Arabic it's the same term. They use that term for the yearly sacrifice. "By whatsoever thou mightest be profited by me, ye suffer him no longer to do anything for his father or mother, making the word of God of none effect through your tradition, which ye have delivered, and many such like things ye do." This was a severe rebuke, and struck at the sorest spot of Pharisaism. The hold of the hierarchic clique among the people lay in continuing in them a superstitious regard for the traditions. So long as the people were traditionist and ritualist, and the Pharisees held in their hands the interpretation of the tradition and the arrangement of the ritual, they could lord it over the consciousnesses of the populace. And we see in this rebuke of Jesus that churchism is the same in all ages of the world. Now, churchism, because they use the word churchism and churchy and stuff like this, but church is a hero shrine, and a lot of faiths don't demonize their heroes. The spies from Jerusalem indirectly rebuked Jesus, not because he did not regard personal cleanliness, but because he did not conform to the minute directions of the ceremonial laws, which had been built by the doctors of the law. In this, they were hypocrites. They had made canons which were contrary to God's express commandments. They had been described by Isaiah, and a telling passage was quoted against them. Jesus cites a case in which the terrible injury of churchism is seen. According to the law of God, a man was to honor his parents. But these churchmen, it's a phrase afterwards, were taught that if a man said korban over any property, it was thenceforth devoted to the church. And no matter how much the parents might be in need, this property was interdicted and alienated to the church. Jesus regarded this as simply horrible. Nothing taken from a needy father or mother could be made acceptable to God by being devoted to what are called sacred purposes. Now, one of the things that we can look at for that sort of thing is that one's charitable obligations start with one's family, and then the general poor and all that sort of stuff. And definitely don't, regardless what you do, don't focus like, but the preacher, he needs a new car. The preacher should have a new car and all that other, and we should have a fancy window in the church and all that other stuff. Take care of the needy first.